If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Chris McDaniel, a reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me in studio is
Jason Rosenbaum
and
Joe Manis.
And our guest this week
is John Diehl.
Yes, the soon-to-be Speaker of the House.
In Missouri. That's
yes.
right.
Yes, not in Illinois.
Yes, not in
Michael
Illinois.
Madigan will be Speaker forever. But even more importantly, I believe he is the first guest we've had on 3 times.
Is that true?
Technically 4, because secret to our listeners, the second time we actually redid it due to a technical snafu.
Oh, that's right. I remember
technical snafu.
And
Representative Diehl, and it was crazy. It was like the last week of this session, and we managed somehow to get Marshall into his office and redo some of it.
He was very nice about redoing it, and now we can all laugh about it because you now have a 118-seat majority, or actually 117.
And the best part about that is I knew what questions you were going to ask me, so the second time around I could do a better job. So,
Jason, you're not supposed to reveal our secret shortcomings here.
That's what I do.
We were supposed to take that to the grave.
Yeah.
It just goes to show all of these little buttons. There's a purpose.
There is a purpose.
And some can really destroy.
Well, that is my role on the
audio.
Politically Speaking podcast, to embarrass ourselves to tens and tens of listeners.
We make your job easy, that's for sure. So let's get into it. You are about to be the Speaker of the House.
The second in a row from the St. Louis area. Yes.
So what do you see as sort of your large goals when you become Speaker?
Sure. Well, obviously the state has some issues in terms of being able to compete on attracting and retaining employers, as well as our next generation of what our industry is going to look like. And I think really what we have to do as a state, what I'm going to spend my time talking about, are the success stories that we have in the state, how we can emulate that, and how we can provide a positive example, particularly to young people in the state, on if they do well in school, stay out of trouble, work hard, that there are opportunities in this state for them to get a job and to do well and actually be part of some really cutting-edge stuff that's going on in the global economy. And I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about that.
A lot of speakers that I've followed, they come in and they express a message that's somewhat similar to that, about wanting to improve the economy of Missouri, about producing economic development. And it seems like, since you're becoming Speaker, you're kind of professing the same desire, which kind of implicitly implies that the state may not be doing as well economically as you'd like. Like, what would you do differently from some of your predecessors?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's the role of government to produce economic development. And I don't think, but I think what we can do is promote what we do well in the state and to encourage what we do well. So I don't think it's any secret that Missouri is probably not the sexiest place for people to want to locate to. It's not one of the hot areas in the country.
We're not on a coast, and we don't have a mountain.
And we don't have sunshine a bunch of times a year.
Yes, we're not North Dakota, obviously.
We have some nice parks, though.
And frankly, though, but also when you look at the state, with the exception of Illinois to our east, the policies in the states that surround us are a lot more friendly to business and have what many would consider to be a more open environment to starting a business, to having a business relocate there, and to provide a culture of entrepreneurship. And I think in some respects in the state, we do things really, really well. I know as Senator Blunt talks about, we sit in the middle of, for example, the largest contiguous farmland in the world.
Yes.
Okay. And so when you look at that, it's we shouldn't try to be something we're not. We need to take a look at. I think the first key to success is knowing what you are, and knowing what you are. What can you do to make yourself better? And we should be a transportation hub. We should be a hub for agriculture. And I say agriculture, I don't mean just growing crops, but But what we have is we have the ability to grow crops, but we also have some of the best animal and cutting-edge animal and plant science research in the world that occur within the boundaries of the state. And so, we need to be promoting that because, as I said, we sit in the middle of the largest contiguous area of farmland in the state. It's connected by rivers, highways. We have great research institutions in the area of plants and sciences. And so that's a strength. That's what we are, and that's an example of things that I think we can do better, continue to improve, and continue to innovate on.
Now, the General Assembly passed a tax cut last year. Do you envision more tax cuts, or do you envision other ways? You talked about, in general, some of your goals, but are you talking about tax cuts or more tax credits? Are there particular specifics that you want to promote?
I want to one, I believe all things being equal, the lower your taxes are, the more competitive you are. So I think if there's opportunities to cut taxes again, I think that's something we're going to try to take advantage of those opportunities. But this is also about promoting within the educational system that we already spend billions of dollars a year on, is focusing, not necessarily spending more money in it, but refocusing how we spend money. We have, by all accounts in the state, thousands of good jobs that go unfilled for a lack of qualified workers for those jobs, while at the same time we graduate thousands of children from high schools and universities that can't get jobs. So that disconnect right there is something that I think.
In other words, there's not a fit between the education and the job opportunities.
So take a look at what happened, at the old McDonnell Douglas and the old University of Missouri Rolla model, where the university and the educational system worked closely with the industry to learn what those needs were. The industry made a certain commitment to hire a certain amount of graduates every year. Okay, and the university down in Rolla became a hub that attracted aeronautical talent from across the country
because they knew that after they got their education, they could
have
get a job.
And we have plenty of world-class industries and companies and research hubs in this state where we can come in and start focusing, I think, on that. It's not necessarily spending more money, but spending the money that we have in a much better way.
Now, one of the newest proposals, and shifting gears here, that the governor just put out has to do with toll roads. As everybody knows, the proposed sales tax that was supposed to go for transportation was rejected overwhelmingly by voters last summer.
Correct.
The governor was not a fan of it. But
after the fact.
Okay. But since then, just the last few days, he has proposed that the Department of Transportation Commission look at toll roads for Interstate 70, which has been a proposal that's been off and on for decades. What is your thoughts about that? This is something that would require legislative action.
Well, I think that's unclear, and I think so. What you're referring to is a letter that the governor released yesterday.
Yes,
and I think that letter is curious in a lot of respects and raises a lot of questions as to what the real intent or agenda is. Number one, I don't think that letter says he's proposing a toll road.
Although it strongly hints at it.
Well, strongly hints at it. Okay. Absolutely.
Okay.
That's let me finish what. It doesn't say that. It says, I want to conduct, and he's instructing. Keep in mind, we're sitting here on, December the 10th, I believe it is?
Yes. I think it is,
okay.
Yep.
And so he's instructed the department. I guess that letter first said, well, hey, we might have a transportation funding crisis in the state. 2 years late to the table. And then instructs his department to conduct a thorough review and analysis of all of the options available to us and how a toll road on Highway 70 could be done and how that would free up other sources of revenue. And by the way, do this all by December 31st. So either this is going to be the fastest funding study ever done in the history of government, okay, or there's already a predetermined outcome on it, and he's trying to set up a process to cover what decision he's already been made. There's a fair amount of debate as to whether or not action of the General Assembly is required or whether he's going to try to go it alone.
Really?
Well, I
would
mean,
he have to get a vote of the people?
Yeah, wouldn't it require? Isn't there like a constitutional ban on tolling right now in the state?
Let's see what he comes out with over the next couple. I think he may be trying to move unilaterally on this.
Huh.
So.
Well, I'm just curious.
Why else would you come in and say, "Give me what my options are by December 31st"?
And Joe and I were talking about this offline earlier. Have you ever been to the Chicagoland area?
Sure, I've been.
Of course he has.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. Have you ever gone through the tollways there?
Yeah.
I don't recall.
I think people who are enthusiastic about tolling need to go through the tollways
Now, this
in
is
Chicago.
Jason Rosenbaum, who spent part of his life.
I'm a Chicagoland native, and granted, if you live there, you can get a little I-Pass and it doesn't cost you as much. But for people that don't live there, you literally stop every 3 miles and pay a toll.
Right.
And for something like I-70, where there's a lot of outstate traffic that goes through there, I wonder if that's going to be part of the concern. Obviously, a lot of the debate is like whether a toll road is good or not, but it's kind of those ancillary questions of whether it would make outside traffic less attractive to go through there, and they may go through another part of the country.
Well, I-70 goes straight west. I'm not defending toll roads, but you do have to go through toll roads on I-70 when you're in Kansas.
So I'm just saying, like,
and on 44 when as soon as you cross the Oklahoma border.
They're not unheard of.
Correct.
But if they're set up in a way like Chicago, where it's very obtrusive, or like that video that you showed before, I think that's going to be a problem for interstate commerce in this state, and it could be something that'll have to be debated more granularly.
Look, anytime you talk about transportation funding, every option is going to be unpopular. And I think the first thing we have to do, particularly in light of what the voters said last summer, I believe it was, I think first thing we have to do is we have to really drill down and see how we're spending the money we have now. And some of my members have been looking into this in a fair amount of detail and believe that there's still more bureaucracy that can be cut out of MoDOT. They believe that what government has done is what government tends to do sometime, and that is take money for one purpose and supplant it for another purpose. So we are paying some administrative and bureaucracy functions out of the road fund right now. So I think one thing we could be looking at, too, is can you pull some of that back out, put it in general revenue where it's supposed to be, and free up more road fund dollars for road projects.
Now, what about increasing the gasoline tax? I know that experts say that wouldn't be enough to cover the needs in Missouri, but it might raise some money. Would you consider that, or is the Republican leadership pretty much against that?
I don't see a whole lot of appetite for increasing the gas tax.
Yeah. So obviously we've had a lot of guests on this show since August 9th, Republican and Democrats, and kind of the stock question we start asking them is how the legislature is going to respond to the aftermath of Michael Brown's shooting and the Ferguson outcry. And, when we've had people on the show, it's kind of been varied about ideas about changing municipal courts, about changes to policing, about talking about the structure of St. Louis County and whether there are too many municipalities. You probably will have the biggest influence on this debate because you direct where some of these bills go. You could send some bills into basically a legislative bottomless pit if you don't like them. So just kind of generally, how do you see the House responding to the Ferguson aftermath, and what sort of things policy-wise should we expect from the Missouri House?
Well, first of all, I think it's a mistake going into the General Assembly in general or at the beginning of a session saying, here's a Ferguson solution. I mean, because let's be realistic. The things that happened in Ferguson, there's not a law you can point to that if it were changed or something were done differently, then it would have avoided what happened. So what happened in Ferguson is more societal. Now, are there things up there that the General Assembly can affect from a structural standpoint that are long-term? Absolutely. So the circumstances that led to where it is today didn't happen in the course of a week
No.
or 6 weeks or 6 months. Likewise, it can't be fixed in a week, 6 weeks, or 6 months. The problems, and this really isn't Ferguson per se, as it is what you see happening in inner cities and some suburban ring counties and whatnot, is really it's a lack of quality educational opportunities. It's a lack of economic opportunities, and it's also, probably the municipal structure hurts. Cities that exist just for the sole purpose of collecting fines and fining its citizens, I think, creates a lot of cynicism. Maybe we need to look at policies that get more police out on the streets, walking the neighborhoods where there's more interaction and a positive interaction versus sitting in cars ticketing people all the time. Mm-hmm. But all these things, are all long-term structural things. What very few people talk about is that Michael Brown was a graduate of Normandy High School. Mm-hmm. Okay, nobody talks about that. Okay, yet we had a bill to try to address transfers in Normandy to give more kids an educational opportunity. I wouldn't have fixed this situation. I'm not meaning to imply that in any way, shape, or form, but it addresses the long-term structural issues, and the governor vetoed that bill without having any positive solutions on how you address that. So to the extent I think we should address it from things that we can truly address, and that is long-term structural issues, educational opportunities, economic opportunities, the relationship of government to its citizens, but then also I think we can, and I can use a position that I have to talk about the positive aspects of the state, the things that we're doing right, and the success stories that we have.
And I know this might be getting a little in the weeds, but even long before the Michael Brown situation, I recall that you sponsored a bill involving kind of I would say, some standards of operation in municipalities. And correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm going from memory, but it was basically saying that some cities had to go up to certain standards of financing, of policing, or the disincorporation of those municipalities may become easier than it did before.
Yeah. Well, what it
would
did
that be something you want to do again?
Once again, 'cause I think that's structural and addresses the relationship of citizens to their government. But what that bill did was set minimal standards. If you want to be a municipality, you have to have minimal standards of operations. That includes passing an annual budget, having audited financial statements, having uniformed police officers be the ones that write citations and tickets. It included written use of force policies, among a whole host of other things. And if a municipality didn't comply with that they could be forced through a process where they were disincorporated or incorporated into another municipality that does meet those basic minimal good government standards.
Yeah, and it didn't pass, but I think it could be something that's brought up to the discussion because that's been a big issue.
Yeah. Actually, there have been a lot of legislators that have reached back out to me during the past couple months and want to try to run with some version of that. And I don't pretend that was the perfect bill, but I think it's a discussion and a step in the right direction on structural things that we can do to fix some of the problems.
Does it help that you and the House Minority Leader as well, in fact, all four leaders of the House and Senate are from the St. Louis area?
Well, Ron Richards from Joplin.
Yeah, correct. Okay.
Senate.
Okay, yes, right.
Oh, you Senate majority. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm talking about the top because you've got you, Jay Kummel, on the House side. You've got Dempsey and Joe Keaveney on the Senate side, talking about the number one in each party. So the point is that all four are from the St. Louis area. Yeah. Or from the. Does that help or hurt in dealing with the Ferguson issue because you at least have more familiarity?
I don't think it really is that material at all. Because once again, I don't think Ferguson was necessarily about the city of Ferguson. Right? This could have happened in Kansas City. We've seen it happen in New York over the past couple weeks, and you've seen it. You've seen these issues pop up all across the country. And I think probably what happened in New York has probably helped St. Louis because it's no longer a St. Louis problem.
Right.
In terms of community and policing relationships and the perception
Cleveland,
of that,
yeah,
and what's happening in Cleveland. So this isn't an area, and I think that's something we need to be careful to keep in mind, that we shouldn't think that the Missouri General Assembly can fix this issue. Now, there's some policies that we control that we have been trying to make steps and make progress on. I think you're going to see a renewed effort toward that, and that's particularly, as we talked about a little while ago, education and some economic job training type of issues, as well as the relationship of citizens to the municipal governments.
Will there be a hearing into the governor's handling with the National Guard?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think the committee meets tomorrow to get organized, and I suspect that's something that's going to go on for several months.
Do you want to talk about that at all, at least from your perspective as House Speaker?
Well, I think it's troubling. I say I've gotten more emails, comments, and telephone calls on the state's lack of response after promises were made. And these aren't from just the usual suspect. These are from a lot of first responders, okay, and then also just a lot of ordinary citizens that don't comment on anything. And I think what's really troubling to a lot of people is that I think everybody in the world knew that West Florissant Avenue in Ferguson was going to be ground zero the night a decision was made. And I think there was a lot of game planning that went on when the decision was going to be released, what the response was going to be. The governor made a point to declare a state of emergency a week early, came to St. Louis. He did press conferences on how the National Guard was going to be ready, willing, and able to step up when requested. Response plans were set up. And then by all accounts, when the time came for the time of the response plan, telephone calls were taken.
Yeah, that was a troubling aspect about it, about how both Ferguson Mayor James Knowles and Delwood Mayor Reggie Jones apparently had no communication with the governor. And at least in Knowles' case, it's not the first time that's happened, because he personally was not given a heads up about the Ferguson Commission. Apparently, the city manager was given a very quick heads up about it. Have you got any insight on why there's just been little communication between the two? Does it have anything to do with politics, given that Knowles is a prominent Republican, or maybe the fact that he doesn't want to be associated with the white leadership of Ferguson? Like, what's going on there?
First of all, I don't think James Knowles was a prominent Republican until maybe this happened,
right?
And people start talking.
Well,
about
he was a prominent Republican within Republican circles, although
sure.
not publicly.
Right, but
that's what I meant.
He holds a nonpartisan office,
correct?
And it shouldn't make any difference whether. But right. as Knowles said, and I told the mayor he shouldn't take it personally. It's how the governor kind of treats everybody.
And apparently he made that comment, and a Democratic senator told him that. But continue.
Right. But I mean, I think that's pretty much across the board. I mean, I think this governor would find that if he gets out and he actually communicates in a meaningful way, don't send letters after the fact or send letters on road funding that says I'm going to have a solution and a comprehensive study done in 2.5 weeks over the holidays, and then here's my response, now work with me. I think if he'd actually engage people in a meaningful way, I think he'd find there are people that are ready, willing, and able to help with some of these difficult situations. But these this way of this non-communication during a crisis like this isn't helpful and isn't productive. I mean, I know the governor gets a lot of accolades on what happened, how he handled Joplin. Well, Joplin, the enemy was gone after 10 or 15 minutes, and it was a question of controlling how do you rebuild buildings and get emergency response. Here, this requires dealing with people.
Yeah, and to be fair, many officials in Joplin were Republican too, and I don't think he had a problem talking with them.
Helping them, right? But, that's my point. So why have a problem with Knowles? I think the issue is not Republican or Democrat. I think it's the ability to interact with people, and to interact with people where you can't completely control the message. And the events of Ferguson were messy, Okay, and I keep thinking of a leader who had some of the response. If you remember George Bush after the Twin Towers were down, that was a messy situation too. You didn't know what was coming up. You didn't know something else, but he got up there, got there in a bullhorn, and said, "I'm here. I'm in charge. I'm taking responsibility for what happens, one way or the other." That comforted a lot of people and pulled people together to get through a crisis. This is done through controlled news conferences, news releases, and then not returning telephone calls. That just doesn't work.
Have you and the governor had any communications on anything? I'm not talking just about Ferguson here. How would you characterize your relationship with the governor?
Very distant and hands off. I mean, he doesn't. Once again, I'm not going to turn this into a gripes, but the style of communication doesn't change.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be my next question. It's like I had to correct myself in the intro because before last week you had 118. Representative Torpey is resigning, and it's uncertain whether he'll be replaced with a Republican. I'm sure you're going to try very hard, but it was Lavoda's district beforehand, so it's not like a super safe Republican district. But the point is, 117 Republicans.
When you only need 109.
When you only need 109, how does that kind of change your mentality when you're dealing with the governor who may veto some things, and now you have a situation where you don't have to necessarily scrape for every single vote to override a veto, especially if you have some Democratic stragglers on your hands?
Oh, I think to be successful, I don't think you can go into any policy issue with that being the assumption.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think you have to constantly work your membership and work with your membership on what you can pass and what you can override. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd certainly rather have 117 than 109. When you had 109, I'd have one or two members that could hold us up or that sort of thing on an override, so we certainly have more of a cushion there. But I don't think that necessarily makes it any easier on dealing with the governor. I'm not sure that really factors into what he thinks. Because if you keep in mind most of the items that we overrode him on during the last veto override, I think it was something like 60 or 70 different items that the House voted. Virtually every single one was with a broad bipartisan support.
Right, because a lot of them were budget items, and
but
other
even
ones
on
were.
the substantive bunch weren't. I mean, I probably only a handful were done on straight party line issues. But I think there's some issues like on tort reform and some other things I think we're much closer to be able to override him with what we have.
Now, what about right to work? Is that going to come up or not?
Well, I think we're going to have a very robust discussion on that also. Again,
really? Okay. Will you be pushing it as much as – I know that had been a key thing for your predecessor.
Oh, I think it's a key thing for a lot of people in the House.
Okay.
The question on right to work, and I think someday Missouri will be a right to work state. A lot of the states around us are. It's trending that way. I think if there's a Republican governor, we will be right to work. So the question is what's the best path to get there?
That was going to be what I was going to say. I mean, the pathway to get there with a Democratic governor is difficult because, you probably have to put it on a ballot initiative. There's also the possibility it could be filibustered in the Senate, and you may not have the veto-proof majority there, or even in the House. We don't know. But I think with a Republican governor, the veto question kind of becomes out of play because both Catherine Hanaway and Tom Schweik, and I assume if he wants to run too, Blaine Luetkemeyer, I think are all pro right to work.
I would have to imagine anybody that would win a nomination in a Republican primary would be right to work.
Exactly. So
on to another issue. Sure. I know within the past week, Attorney General Chris Koster testified before the House. I know this. You didn't organize this. This was your predecessor, but it was dealing with ethics issues. Sure. New York Times investigation that found a rather cozy relationship between him and lobbyists
and other attorneys. In fairness, other attorneys general, other states too,
throughout the nation. Yes,
but he was highlighted.
Yes, he was very prominent within that story. I mean, what are your thoughts on that story? But on a larger issue, what's the likelihood that the legislature considers ethics reform this session?
Well, I think when you're talking ethics reform, I approach it from from the standpoint that probably the most important thing you can do is transparency. Okay, everything else is arbitrary. So when you look at whether you have contribution limits or caps or whatever it is you want to call it, or gift limits or caps or whatever it is, the most important element on that is that things be transparent and open, where you can come on and people can log on to a computer, hit the website, and see what people are up to. Okay, I think that's the number one principle, and I think that's what was probably, most controversial about the situation with Koster, is that you don't know what matters the Attorney General is considering, okay, or the motivations by doing it. The General Assembly, it's fairly open. You know what bills are filed, you know what bills die, you know what bills pass, you know how people vote. You don't know what the Attorney General is investigating, or the reasons why something was settled or not settled, or why it was settled for this amount of money. So I think that's the backdrop. That being said, we're going to do some things in the rules in the House this year to address, and this was long before the Chris Koster situation. We're going to address off-site committee dinners. Okay. We are going to get rid of issue development committees, which have been used in the past to hide, or to hide's probably not the right word, but to mask gifts and whatnot. So we're going to get rid of those committees. I want to look at a revolving door policy where you can't leave the General Assembly and become a lobbyist, and there should be a cooling off period on that. So I think that's something we're going to look hard at too. And if people want to have a discussion on contribution limits, I would be open to that. But the dirty little secret on contribution limits
is that they don't work.
Money finds its way in, but
right.
But everyone wants.
I'm sorry to be that blunt or cynical, but look at the federal system.
Right.
I mean,
right. So everybody wants the carve out so they can spend the money how they want to do it. So the minute you say let's have a limit, but the unions, you can't touch how the unions do theirs.
There's super PACs or there are 527s or any of those things.
I think one thing we can do, which is interesting. I think there's a lot of concern over the C4s and the super PACs.
In fact, I've done some talks about that.
Right, is whether or not, and I think we probably can, and I think one thing we're going to look into is whether or not we can require disclosure of who donates and how the money's being spent.
But that was an idea that was proposed like 2 years ago by both Representative Richardson and Barnes, and it never got anywhere. What happened there? Is there any reason? Is it just too difficult to get through the law or something like that?
So just for our listeners, 501c4s are social welfare nonprofits. They can give as much money as they can spend their money as they please, and they don't have to disclose their donors. That's what's particularly appealing about them.
And 501c6s are also being used.
Well, what they are,
but both of them don't have to.
They're issue advocates.
Correct.
Right.
So they could come in and say, tell your state rep or this, they're bad on this, or voting, without, so they're not allowed to advocate for or against specific.
But they can frame it in such a way
to
make you look pretty bad.
For example, back in 2012, one of those committees was used by opponents of Lieutenant Governor Kinder to attack him in a very salacious way. And it was also used for a couple of other things. And after that happened, and the reason I brought that up, because that was 2012, there were some Republicans who saw that as well. When we repealed campaign contribution limits in 2008, the reason we did it was because we wanted to do it in the name of transparency. Right. And the fact that you couldn't see the donors kind of chafed against that idea. And one of the difficulties behind that was kind of alluded to was just making sure you write it in a way to where it's precise or something like that. I don't know if that's the concern about doing that, but it was proposed 2 years ago and nothing happened with it.
Under
so I'm
Citizens United, I don't think we can control the limits that go into something like that. But I do think that if they're advocating for or against a ballot issue or another matter, that we can require campaign-style reporting. So disclosure is a little bit different than controlling the limits on. I think
because Koster actually is endorsing even that part, transparency.
All right, I'm going to have to cut us off here, unfortunately. But to close us out here, you can read all of our stories at stlpublicradio.org. You can follow me on Twitter at CSMcDaniel. Jason, you can be followed on Twitter.
Jay Rosenbaum.
And Joe?
At J Mannis, that's JMANNIES.
And you can be followed on Twitter as well, I believe.
J. Diehl Jr.
Very good. Well, we will be back next week. Until then, so long.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.